I've allowed plenty of time at the end of my little talk here for questions and comments because I always enjoy that a lot. Yes, I've been vegetarian for 23 years, ever since I started studying books from the library as soon as I joined the Theosophical Society. Annie Besant had a profound influence on my thinking about animals, and she really opened my eyes about how they were being treated and how that affects us all. Up until that point, I was 27 at that point, and up until then I never really thought about being vegetarian. But when I started reading her books and she talked about it, it had an influence on me, and also in other areas of animal advocacy, because as you know, she was very outspoken about animals and their rights, just as she was humans and their rights and women and their rights, and she was just quite an activist. And she talked a lot about animal experimentation. So that was one of the issues I wanted to get involved in. And the point is, I became a vegetarian by becoming a theosophist. That was a major turning point in my life. And it was such an important turning point that I left my secure job with IBM and came here to manage the kitchen, because I wanted to learn about vegetarian cooking in hopes of eventually owning a restaurant. Well, that never happened because life intervened and the dissection issue came up and my life took a different turn. But on to other animal advocacy work, but of course I stayed vegetarian, and it's a big part of my life. I've noticed that vegetarianism is more common in Europe than it is over here, except maybe in France. I don't really know. When I went to France, I didn't know what any of the food was, and nobody would speak English or tell me, so I ate bread and cheese the whole time I was there. But in America, if you've been vegetarian for any length of time, you realize that there are more and more vegetarian items available in the supermarket, which is making it a lot easier than it used to be, especially if you have people in your family that are not vegetarian. It's easier to please them in cooking. So today, I decided in putting this talk together that I really did not want to focus a lot on animal cruelty and what happens to animals in the process of becoming food. It's a subject that is somewhat upsetting to me, and that's one of the reasons I didn't want to talk about it too much, and I don't think I need to. And I also don't want to focus too much on the environmental impact of a meat-based diet, and I'm not really going to expound upon the health benefits of being vegetarian. All of this is really important information, but anybody who wants to know about it in depth can get a book about it. I would recommend Diet for a New America. It's a wonderful book that John Robbins wrote, and it covers all of those issues and many more in depth, and it's available in any bookstore. I wanted to limit this talk primarily to the theosophical perspective and the impact of diet on the evolution of spiritual consciousness. And that was a topic that I couldn't find a lot of information about. So I had to do some research, and I found some old papers that C.W. Leadbeater had given a talk on vegetarianism that had been recorded at Adyar. And so had Annie Besant. So I had both of their papers to look at, and I also had the journals from the Upper Triad organization, which I've been reading for 20 some odd years as well. And then some information from vegetarian societies like the Colorado Vegetarian Society. And those were my sources in getting the information for this talk. Now, in the Theosophical Society, as you know, vegetarianism is not required of any of the members. In fact, it's left up to the members to decide what they want to eat or how they want to apply any of the principles of the Theosophical Society. We only ask that you agree that we're part of a brotherhood of humanity. Now, when Dora hired me back in 1986, I remember talking to her about this, and she told me that about half the members were vegetarian. And she didn't think that it was a very important issue as far as membership was concerned. Dora's focus, as you may know, was on healing people and working with people, and she thought that was really somewhat more important. One perspective on being vegetarian from the perspective of spiritual evolution is the idea of the continuum, which is where on one end you have the meat eater, and on the other end you have probably the breatharian, someone who doesn't eat at all. And here we are sort of in the middle. And here we include dairy and eggs in the diet, and I do as well at home. And the next step up from that would be a vegan diet where you eliminate dairy and eggs. And then from there would probably be moving into raw foods and on up from that. The step before mine would be eating fish. If I have time, I'm going to talk a little bit about fish. It's a bit of an issue for me. I can't tell you how many times I've had people ask me if I eat fish because I'm vegetarian. So I'm sure some of you have had that same experience as well. And then chicken, and then beef and pork would be on the lower end vibrationally. Energetically, I think that being negative and self-righteous about what you eat goes a long way towards alienating people from vegetarianism. I don't think it's very productive, and I also don't think it's very spiritual. It seems fundamentalist to me. I know a lot of people like that, and they have turned off people to vegetarianism from the very beginning by coming across as judgmental about diet. And there's no judgment in this talk at all. I'm just up here to present a perspective. So what is a vegetarian? For the purpose of this talk, a vegetarian is anyone who abstains from eating food derived from killing animals. I'm not going to focus on the different types of vegetarian diet because this is mainly about not killing animals for food. And as Theosophists, we have to look at choices and consequences from the Theosophical perspective. Also, individual and collective impact of our choices, and the physical level and higher level impact of our diet. And then finally, what are our responsibilities to consciously choose to tread the spiritual path in considering what we eat. Now, from the occult perspective, occult, of course, meaning hidden, as in hidden laws of nature, to the Theosophist, this is more important than the physical. How does diet affect spiritual evolution? Since we are all one, and I believe we are, every thought, word, and deed affects us both individually and collectively. From a higher perspective, there's no space between us or any other living thing on this planet. Both our personal and group evolution, and in fact the entire planet, participates in the consequences of the choices that each of us make. The Theosophical perspective sees the working out of a divine plan in the mineral, plant, animal, and human kingdoms. So everything which exists is infused with the same divine energy. Therefore, it follows that killing and eating animals is actually anti-evolutionary. It inhibits our personal and planetary spiritual growth. In terms of dharma, or responsibility, the plant kingdom has responsibility to provide food for the animal kingdom and the human kingdom, while the mineral kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom, stay with me on this, have no such dharma or responsibility towards others. Our principal form of nourishment actually comes from prana, which conveys the natural vitality of the logos. Our secondary form of nourishment comes from the air that we breathe. So food and water, although they're not first, they are still very much required for effective experience here on the physical plane. Now, the food that we eat is vitalized by the life from which it is derived. Plants are vitalized distinctly differently than mineral substances, and they have a definitely developed etheric component and a rudimentary astral component. So vegetarian food generally provides a natural vitality that's clear and pure, and the strength that results from eating a vegetarian diet. It's not particularly intense or quick, but it contributes most effectively to the momentum of vitality, more so than animal foods. Now, animal substances have a definitely developed etheric and definitely developed astral component, with the etheric component conveying more intense and quick strength. Think of the weightlifters that can't run, but they can lift heavy weights. So this type of strength is less effective than the strength momentum of the plant substances. Also, the animal substance conveys a substantial animalistic type of quality through its astral component, which is, of course, qualified by that animal's emotions and instinct. So the problem for humans is that our duty is to actually rise above our animal nature. That animal nature being derived from our own body and its history. So a diet of animal food definitely inhibits that accomplishment by infusing the human body with coarse astral influences from the animal. So the flesh diet, although it's not much of a hindrance to common average humans, and I'm not saying that detrimentally, just as to differentiate them from people who are consciously on a spiritual path. It's not much of a hindrance to them because they're not very spiritually aware or active, but it's a definite and substantial hindrance to anyone who aspires to spiritual progress. There is an obligation for humanity to assist animal lives in preparation for individualization. In domestication, by association, such as our pets, our cats and dogs, I think we've all noticed, or at least like to believe, that our pets have that spark of individuality already developing, and we can see that in our interaction with them. But not by raising and killing them for food. Animal lives function astrally, emotionally, as their very highest practical expression, while human lives, in principle, function mentally as their highest practical expression. Animal lives do not have thinking or reasoning capacity. They do have brains, which are not in any sense minds. These brains unconsciously relate instinct to experience and expression. But the thinking of the animal is actually accomplished by the group soul, which Rupert Sheldrake would probably refer to as the morphogenetic field of the species. I always wondered how different we would be treating animals if they could speak to us in our own language instead of their language. So the line of demarcation between animal and human lives is not all as clear as that between the plant and animal lives. In fact, the only substantial differences between animals and humans are, first, individuality. Second would be relative quality or refinement, and then the spark of mind. Animals are not yet individualized, and humans are. By definition, that's what we are, is individualized animals. Animals have relatively crude or coarse physical, etheric, and astral bodies, while humans are relatively more refined. They're governed by group souls, while humans are more or less self-governed. In principle, human beings are self-conscious and self-determined, and animals are not. So the human being inhabits an animal body that has all of the inherited animal instincts of its species. We are intended to cultivate self-consciousness and rise above the animal aspects of being, and to do it while effectively using the body as an instrument for higher consciousness. Animals are not meant to be the servants of humanity any more than poor people are meant to be the servants of wealthy people. However, humans are karmically the servants, meaning the stewards of the animal kingdom. So the real relationship between human and animals ultimately is one of collaboration, which is the same as it should be between all peoples as well, except that humans are intended to provide leadership in consciousness for the animal kingdom. Humans are of a higher rung because we're self-conscious and have the power of choice, not just an instinctual response to what we experience in life. We have the seemingly awful power to create chaos, disharmony, and destruction of life and even civilization. It's our personal choice, but I believe that we can and should choose to align our will with the higher divine will. And in doing this, we should extend love, compassion, and respect to all forms of life, recognizing the truth that we are all one. And we each partake of this same life. In essence, whatever we do to other life forms, we are doing to ourselves. Like the physician's oath, we should first do no harm. A lot of people have trouble understanding this, the idea of unity, that we are all connected, that we are all one, and that everything that exists on the planet is one. So sometimes I use the analogy of the arm, that the cow is my arm. I would not kill and eat my arm, and I would not kill and eat a cow, because we are connected and we are of the same essence. That usually drives it home. So in remembering this, we can choose to raise up the vibration of all life by our mere presence, and the extension of love by our positive, loving thoughts, and certainly by refraining from inflicting harm and destruction on other life forms. Now, I have found that arguments, the usual arguments for and against vegetarianism, are always subject to dispute. That which cannot be disputed can be either ignored or denied. It's the nature of the ego mind. And I know I've run into this as an animal advocate of many years. I've run into this discussion of vegetarianism with non-vegetarianisms repeatedly and frequently, and I have noticed that many will argue that humans are not suited to eating meat, that we have neither fangs nor claws, okay, that our digestive anatomy suggests a vegetarian diet if we look at how it compares to vegetarian animals. But some people will disagree and claim that humans are omnivores and adapted to any diet. And some will say that the Bible clearly states that plants are given to us for food, while others will point out that eating animals is allowed in Scripture, and they'll cite these passages one by one to support their case. One may argue that eating less meat will free up land for feeding the starving masses. Another will counter that political agendas and corruption make that an impossible dream. Although much evidence exists to show that the vegetarian way of eating provides superior health, anyone can argue that there are numerous exceptions on both sides. But no one can argue that animals themselves must be killed to provide meat for human consumption, and that this is a nasty, cruel, and horrible business indeed. And so we turn to the theosophical perspective. What about the killing of animals for food? Where is our responsibility here? As a guiding principle, we know that we are all one. And so whatever is done for us through another is actually done by us as well. We are not absolved of participating in the killing of animals for food if we eat meat. We share in both the guilt and the suffering, and therefore the karma. Why are animals afraid of us? It's always seemed unnatural to me that they should be. I would love to pet a squirrel or hold a bird or have a wild animal come up to me and not be afraid of me. This rarely happens. Well, they've learned through instinct to flee from humans because they fear we will harm them. And that's because we have harmed them so many times. And of course, that's not natural. Over time, this has become instinct, again, absorbed into the morphogenetic field of each species. Now, occasionally, I've seen this on nature programs, and you may have as well. There may be remote regions of the earth where pods of animals exist that have never even seen humans. And when researchers go into these areas, often the animals are not afraid of them. They're curious about them. They're friendly to them. Another exception to this, we all know of St. Francis of Assisi, who radiated love so that no animal feared him. And even today, it may be possible to become like this if you radiate love, because animals are attuned to that. Annie Besant talks about yogis who've been known to go into the jungle and have dangerous wild animals befriend them and even lie at their feet and lick their feet. Harmlessness, the decision to be harmless in thought and word and deed, all starts in the mind with our thinking. And this is known as ahimsa, which I'm sure you've all heard of. The Jain religion is very much into ahimsa, the harmless way, which is a dynamic. Harmlessness is dynamic. It's not just specific to a certain activity. It's a whole frame of mind that encompasses your whole life. It is what we think and feel that makes us what we are. And by the proper use of determination and will, we can train the mind to think only those thoughts that are worthy of a spiritually directed person. We can purposely rid the mind of all unkind and critical thoughts, and at the same time cultivate the qualities of harmlessness, kindness, and loving understanding in all areas of our lives. It is believed that the practice of harmlessness alone will do more to produce harmonious conditions in a person's daily life than any other work that you can do, mainly because it is the expression of the life of the person who realizes that he or she is actually infinite divine love, that that's your nature. And infinite divine love is harmless. The roles of the various kingdoms in nature can be considered in terms of karma and the need for harmlessness. As mentioned earlier, the plant kingdom has certain responsibilities to perform, including that of providing food and oxygen for the animal and human kingdoms. The animal kingdom also has certain responsibilities, but providing humanity with flesh foods is not one of them. Positive harmlessness implies strength and discipline, not weakness or inability. I think we can all see this simply by how difficult it is to put our ideals into practice, even trying to be harmless for a day, for one day, not have a critical thought about another person, not do anything to hurt any other living being. Trying to do that for one day, it's very much a challenge. Now, from the occult perspective, is a vegetarian diet necessary? As mentioned earlier, it's probably negligible for the common man, human, but for those of us who want to advance along the path, to eventually become masters in our own right, or Mahatmas, purity of the physical vehicle is a necessity if you want to get off the wheel and go home. So, to quote C.W. Leadbeater, a paragraph out of his paper, there are some students hovering round the fringes of occultism who are not yet prepared to follow its dictates to the utmost, and therefore do not accept its teaching when it interferes with their personal habits and desires. Some such have tried to maintain that the question of food can make little difference from the occult standpoint. But the unanimous verdict of all the great schools of occultism, both ancient and modern, has been definite on this point and has asserted that for all true progress, purity is a necessity, even on the physical plane and in matters of diet, as well as in far higher matters. Now, we know that the physical, astral, and mental are all influenced by each other. The astral reflects the imaging of thought and deed, so that we should endeavor to refine these vehicles to resonate with higher aspirations and energies. Clairvoyance, and we have many of those in our history, can clearly see the difference in coarseness caused by diet and other activities and thoughts as well. And there's a big difference in the light allowed through a pure vehicle as opposed to one tainted by coarse material from the physical and astral planes. Now, I can see this also as a flower essence practitioner because my clients range from people who eat meat and drink to people that are on raw foods diets. And those people who are on that end of the continuum where it's of a higher frequency tend to respond much more quickly and get much more of a benefit from a flower essence remedy than those who are eating meat and drinking alcohol. And flower essences are a vibrational remedy, somewhat similar to homeopathy, although not exactly the same. So you might ask, how does an impure vehicle affect evolution? Well, we have this duty to develop and refine ourselves as vehicles for higher consciousness to express on this plane. Our soul is trying to control and utilize the lower bodies. This is made more difficult or even impossible if those bodies are tainted by coarse energies. The higher senses simply cannot operate effectively. The suffering of the animals raised and transported and killed for food is released into the astral plane and finds its way to affect every living thing on the planet. Leadbeater says this wave of horror especially affects children who are not as hardened as adults. Now, I am not clairvoyant, but I am intuitive and empathic, especially with animals, probably more so with animals than with humans. I always have been, even as a child. And I grew up, when I was young, 10 out of my 12 early school years, I lived in Amarillo, Texas, which is full of feedlots and slaughterhouses. And even today, I remember feeling terribly sad and depressed as a child, though I really had no reason to. As I was reading this in Leadbeater's paper, it occurred to me that I was probably affected by the astral environment of the slaughterhouses and the cows that were suffering so. My younger brother also feels depressed when he thinks about our growing up in Amarillo, and he's also very sensitive and a vegetarian, although he's not a theosophist. I can't, even today, if I think about it, it makes me feel sad, so I guess that's, but you know, in the whole scheme of things, I decided a long time ago that that probably helped to move me in the direction of wanting to do something to raise consciousness to help animals. So what about the effect of those who actually work in the business of animal slaughter? And here I have to think of my older brother, Mike. When he was 16 and out of school for the summer, he wanted a job, and my mother couldn't find a job for him. He got a job working in a slaughterhouse in Amarillo, and his job was to hose off the killing floor, where he had to keep it clean. As they were slaughtering animals and cleaning them out, he had to wash the floors. And every day, for a week, he came home from work, got sick, and went to bed. And at the end of the week, he quit. And that was the end of that. And I was really glad. But Annie Besant said, I'm going to quote from her paper now, "Now I venture to submit that if people want to eat meat, they should kill the animals for themselves. That they have no right to degrade other people by work of that sort. Nor should they say that if they did not do it, the slaughter would still go on. That is no sort of way of evading a moral responsibility. Every person who eats meat takes a share in that degradation of his fellow men. On him and on her personally lies the share, and personally lies the responsibility. And if this world be a world of law, if it be true that law obtains not only in the physical, but also in the mental and the moral and the spiritual world, then every person who has a share in the crime has a share also in the penalty that follows on the heels of the crime, and so in his own nature is brutalized by the brutality that he makes necessary by his share and the results that come therefrom." So, all of the suffering of the animals is a karmic record held against humanity. We're all part of everything that happens in this world, and all of humanity is being held back in their spiritual evolution, in our spiritual evolution, all of us, by this business of killing animals for food. And nothing that causes this much suffering can be justified. Now, you might argue that it's more important to have a pure heart and soul, and you would be right. But why not have both? Why make it more difficult and create barriers? I mean, it's hard enough to control the mind and the thinking, and the emotions and the body. Even the masters have struggled with this, so why add to the load? It's simple enough to become vegetarian and allow for a natural refinement of the lower vehicles to take place over time. Now, our responsibility towards nature. When we align our efforts with the evolution of consciousness, we embrace respect and compassion for all life. All life is permeated by divine love. Animals enjoy their lives just as we do. They want to live. They don't wish to suffer. They don't wish to die. They experience life much the same as we do, which is on the subjective level. Anyone can discern this just by objectively observing animals, whether they be pets or animals in the wild. Common sense and reason will show this to be true. Why then do we love some animals, such as our pets, and slay others for food? It seems a bit hypocritical. Now, when I first became vegetarian, I ran into resistance, to say the least, from some family members. I remember after I first became vegetarian, my husband didn't cook, so he had to eat what I fixed. And we would go to visit his mother, and she seemed to take this personally, as if it were some affront to her that I was no longer fixing meat for her son. And when we'd go to visit, she would always make a lot of meat dishes for him and push them on him at the table. Here, eat this, eat this, eat this, like he's going to starve to death if he didn't eat meat. So my observations and conclusions from my interaction with people who are critical of vegetarianism, sometimes it seems that there's some guilt there that shows itself as defensiveness. I don't know what else it could be. I'm not a psychologist, but it does seem that way to me. It may be unconscious, but we all know on some level that this is anti-evolutionary to be killing our animal brothers, and astrally we're all affected by this. The planetary consciousness carries this vibration, and the spark of divinity within knows that it's wrong to kill. Yet all kinds of denial and defenses will arise to protect our meat eating. Why? Why are we, when I say we, I mean humanity, why are we so attached to eating meat? Well, first, of course, there's culture, family, love, food. Many children are born preferring to be vegetarian, but are having meat offered to them daily by a well-meaning family. And running the dissection hotline, I would often get calls from students who were really upset because they wanted to be vegetarian, but their parents wouldn't allow it. And then they would want to refuse to dissect a frog or something in their science class, and the teacher, being hostile, would say, well, are you vegetarian? And of course, the student would have to say no. And it was a very frustrating situation. I learned to work around it and encourage and empower the student without actually interfering, because you can't interfere with someone's home life. I believe that after many lifetimes of eating meat, you can also develop a physical body that craves it. And then you're faced with refining that body, and vegetarian food might at first seem alien and unsatisfying. It takes commitment to overcome this. Even when I first became vegetarian, I went around hungry for a week, and then I tried to eat some tuna and it made me sick. So I knew I was on the right track as far as becoming vegetarian. I just had to let my body adapt to it. I didn't starve, I adapted, I learned to cook vegetarian and became healthier for it, certainly. All right, there's also the image that meat is for the rich. Fancy restaurants offer expensive steaks and cuts of meat. The media portray family holiday gatherings with the turkey on the table. All of this is in our subconscious as a culture. Bodies have adapted to the taste of meat and crave it. It's accepted without question. In school, in fact, children run into being accused of being weird if they want to be vegetarian, and they're considered weak, especially if you're a boy. There's the hideous horror of the whole business of killing animals for food that's not exposed because we don't want to look at it. I don't even want to look at it. There's selfishness. Some people just don't care yet or recognize the need to care, a sense of apathy about it. And some people even deny that animals will suffer pain. There's an insistence by some people that God created animals for food and that it's natural to eat them. And a lack of motivation because it's just too big of a problem to make a difference if one person quits eating meat. There's also fear of ridicule. Okay for health reasons, but not for humane reasons. That makes some people uncomfortable. And there's resistance to change. Doesn't matter, it's inconvenient. I'd have to cook 2 meals if I'd changed to being a vegetarian. There's also the history of meat eating, which some people claim justifies our continued meat eating. And there's also a lack of interest. I have found this, and I've been surprised to find it, even among many New Agers and healers, a lack of interest in vegetarianism. When I first started using flower essences about 13 years ago, I was using Paralandras. And I don't know if you're familiar with Paralandra, but the woman who runs Paralandra and makes those wonderful flower essences has written a book called Behaving as If the Life in All Things Mattered. And I was really surprised when in this book I read, and she does everything intuitively, her guides give her this information that she puts in the book about her essences and her philosophy of life. And she claims that the group soul of the cows volunteered to come down and serve as food for humans. So I don't know if that's true or not, but the theosophical perspective is clear that harming other lives is detrimental both individually and collectively. So we need to be able to look at this issue objectively, with reason and common sense. You would never encounter this kind of resistance and all these things if you were talking about the need to purify your vehicle by giving up sugar or broccoli or even alcohol. It's because it's meat and it's animals and they're killed, and on some level we're all affected by that. No one wants a crabby vegetarian lecturing them, but there should, not me, but there should be an honest effort to set a good example and to educate our fellow humans about the effects of their dietary choices. I want to just quickly touch on spiritual traditions and vegetarianism, and then I'd like to take some questions or comments from the audience. The basis of vegetarianism for many of us is ethical. So what do the world's religions have to say about killing animals for food? Well, Buddhism teaches that the path to liberation lies in overcoming attachment and desire. The first precept of Buddhism is not to kill any living being. As meat eating involves killing animals, it would seem that vegetarianism is a consequence of the first precept. The Mahayana tradition is especially strong on vegetarianism. It pictures the Buddha not only as himself a vegetarian, but as one who taught others to be vegetarians. Now, not all Buddhists are vegetarian, but a lot of them are. Hinduism, now the Hindu tradition clearly advocates vegetarianism, and Hindu teachers have advocated vegetarianism for many centuries. We all think of Mahatma Gandhi when we think of Hindus and vegetarianism. Then we have the Jain religion, another of the great traditions of India, which consists of followers of the prophet Mahavira. Like Buddhism and Hinduism, it shares the idea of reincarnation, karma, and nonviolence. They are the ones that are associated with ahimsa. Paganism. The pagan religions include not only ancient religions such as those of the mother goddess and the classical paganism of Greece and Rome, but also modern neo-pagans and others in the New Age movement. Classical paganism has had many illustrious vegetarians who are outspoken on this subject and have written papers and books that are still used to this day. They quote the pagan Federation principles in support of their vegetarianism: do what you will, but harm none. Judaism. Many Jews are today vegetarians. They base their vegetarianism on the fact that the first diet commanded by God in Genesis was a vegetarian diet. Quote, God also said, I give you all the plants that bear seed, everywhere on earth, and every tree bearing fruit which yields seed, they shall be yours for food, or meat, depending on which translation you're reading. The ultimate desire of God, according to Judaism, is for a world like that of the Garden of Eden, where humans and even animals are all vegetarian. So compassion for animals is part of the Jewish teachings. Now, Christianity. There are a lot of Christian vegetarians. Most Christians today, though, probably eat meat without giving it a second thought. But many of the early Christians were vegetarian. According to some early church writings, Matthew, Peter, and James, the brother of Jesus, were vegetarians, and many of the Old Testament principles concerning compassion for animals are accepted by Christians. Islam does not recommend any particular kind of diet. However, there is respect for animals and even the practice of vegetarianism among those who practice Islam. The Prophet Muhammad himself was kind to animals, something even Western historians have recognized. When some of his followers had set fire to an anthill, he compelled them to extinguish it. And in the Quran, there is not an animal in the earth nor a creature flying on two wings, but they are peoples like unto you. So some followers of Islam have become vegetarian. So what of the future? Will we ever see a vegetarian world? That would be the new frontier. I don't know. I don't really expect to in my life. I don't see how. It's hard to imagine. I do believe, though, that we have a responsibility to encourage the evolution of consciousness, each in our own way, but always in the direction of alignment with the divine plan. We must hold the ideal of peace on earth and a true brotherhood of humanity, of compassion and respect for all life. We all have a duty to our own body and the energies that make up these bodies. By embracing harmlessness in thought and word and deed, we're becoming and then being what we truly are, eternal, infinite, divine love. As Theosophists, we should endeavor to choose our diet consciously and with regard to the impact these choices will have on all creation. Let the animals evolve and individuate through love instead of fear. It's our choice and our responsibility. Thank you.
Could you go over again just a little bit about the plant world and how their job is to be food? If I understood you, I might not have understood you correctly. And also you were going to mention something about fish.
I was, if I had time, I wanted to leave 15 minutes for, I will say briefly though that to my mind it's a myth that fish is a better choice, because I think that fish suffer terribly in being killed. And also I don't think they're healthier because fish are not monitored or regulated in any way, and our waters are becoming terribly polluted on this planet. And I think that just to say that, you know, it's better to eat fish because they live a life free until they die is the same argument as hunting. And again, I don't really have time to go into all of that, but yeah. But the plant kingdom, yes, is basically more of an etheric than an astral component, and it conveys life energy in the form of food to both humans and animals. So that's my understanding of it anyway.
I'd like to recommend to anyone who's interested in knowing. I'd like to recommend to anyone who's interested in understanding the plant world, the book called The Secret Life of the Plants. The amount of research that's been done to justify the plant world as our food supply is thoroughly covered in that book. and I have several copies in my own personal library and recommend it to people all the time.
Thank you.
I would like to recommend that everyone become familiar with the work of this Japanese researcher. I think it's Masaru Emoto. I may have the first name wrong, but Emoto, a Japanese researcher, has done very interesting experiments by first doing various things to water and then examining the frozen water crystals microscopically. And basically, you might say the summation of that is that water, which is about 70% of our own physical bodies, takes on the effect of prayer or music or all kinds of other influences, so that what you have taken from the animal is going into your body with all of that horror and the ugly molecular structure, which you can see in photographs. It's readily available on the internet, and I just think that's something that everyone should become familiar with.
Thank you, Miles. Yes, I've seen those photographs. They're really dramatic.
I come from a little bit of an alternative perspective in this. I've been strongly contemplating vegetarianism in this last week because of my particular body type and temperament. However, in communication with animals and plants, in my experience, the energy field of both is very complex, both individually and collectively. The treatment of animals in the society is very inhumane, and we could grow by changing that. However, the native peoples, as one example, used all of the buffalo. There was nothing left, and at the end, absolutely nothing. And it was a matter of prayer, it was a matter of spirituality, and it was a matter of life and a gift from Creator. Native people see the animal kingdom as teachers of particular traits of existence, similar to the idea of the 7 rays. It is no different to eat an animal than to eat maple syrup, but we honor all of creation when we do it. I'm astounded at the vegetarians drinking Diet Coke as artificial sweeteners and the acid of the substance itself, just as another example. It's not food. Native people are highly refined and spiritually pure, though they eat meat. I went outside, have been visited, just as a quick list of the top of my head, by rabbits, birds, many types of flies, raccoons and squirrels. You get the idea. Not because I radiate love, though that is one way in which that can occur, but because I have a relationship with them in my neighborhood, in my backyard. One of recycling. I have plants that come to my yard because they know that there's nowhere else safe for them to live. Plants, not animals. Plants that come to my yard and tell me that there's no safe place for them to live, and can they live in my yard? And I have the relationship with them of not pouring chemicals down my drains, eating foods without additives, recycling, the list goes on and on. So I just wanted to add that perspective to the one that's been shared today, and I appreciate you sharing it.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And yes, I agree that many earlier cultures, especially Native Americans, they had a close relationship with their food, and they had reverence for the animals that they used to sustain their bodies, which is so different from animal agriculture as it is today. Anything else?
I thoroughly agree that the way animals are raised and treated today is a horror, and I just, there's no dispute there in my mind for that. But I'm curious if you could expand a little bit on, if I got this correctly, that animals are not the slaves of men. I'm wondering about the use of animals for labor. I'm wondering, what is their purpose? What is their job if they're not, so to speak, beasts of burden?
Right. My take on this is that animals are like our younger brothers in evolution. They're caught in this web of life just like we are on this planet, and that their consciousness is evolving through ever-changing forms. I don't really know that they particularly have any other relationship with humans other than as collaboration, but certainly, you know, humans have used animals all through history for all kinds of things and have even had to rely on them for survival, like the Native Americans. And that's why there's no judgment in this talk. I think we all have to do the best we can. If you have to use an animal, you give thanks for it and use the animal, and don't incur any guilt for that. But if you don't have to use an animal in your life, if you don't have to inflict any harm of any kind or enslave an animal for any reason, then that would be the better choice.
We have one over here first. Is it Maria?
I just wanted to say that one hopeful development, even within the last 10 years, is just this enormous effort to understand the consciousness of other forms of life. So we have individuals, I'm trying to think of the name of the, Stephanie Kaza, who has written about the consciousness of trees and the whole question of decimating trees for lumbering and trying to communicate with these beings to get a sense of our impact on them as a whole. And so much has been coming out recently about communicating with animals. So we don't have to wish for them to speak our language. We can learn theirs. And we know this is not only possible, but that interspecies communication is going on all the time. We're just not aware of it. And it seems to me that this is one way in which we're changing from the inside out. We're not becoming vegetarian because we want to be healthier, but because we understand that these beings are very much like ourselves in the way they experience suffering and in their desire to be happy and in their desire to have a relationship with us that's positive. So, and it seems to me that we don't even have to think in terms of using animals, that if we develop a relationship that's more conscious, then as companions on this planet, we will work out ways that we can be together, that it will no more be humans using animals for medicine and all of this sort of thing, but really a relationship of mutual respect and help.
Yes, thank you.
There's someone back here. There's a lady here.
One of the things that seems very encouraging recently is that I understand that teenage girls have been turning to vegetarianism in very large numbers, so large that the meatpacking industry has become extremely concerned and has been trying to use counter advertising to make it clear to teenage girls that eating meat was the in thing to do.
Yes, I can think of an example of that in a recent commercial that I saw where they were using a beautiful young woman to wash a car while she's eating a hamburger. So, well. Scantily clad, that's right.
I have 4 cats,
Yes.
and I open cans and bags to feed them. And there's meat in those. I wondered if anybody had a good solution to that.
I don't see any way around that. It seems a natural part of their diet. I do know that some people will go to extreme measures to give them a vegetarian diet and supplant it with taurine or some kind of amino acid that they have to have that they'll die without. When I had dogs, I fed them dog food with meat in it. It just seemed very difficult to do otherwise, and they are anatomically carnivorous. Yeah.
I know we were in India and visiting a lady there that had a couple cats, and she cooked the food. It was grains only for her animals, dogs and cats she had, and it was all grains, and they ate it, and all the animals were very slim in her household.
Wow. That's dedication.
And they liked their food, but we have animals that aren't used to that, so how to
Right.
get...
Yeah. When does that become cruel to your pet to say, you're going to eat my lentils when you've been feeding them meat for years? I really don't know the answer to that. So, Miles?
I have one other comment. You spoke about communication between humans and animals. If anyone is not familiar with gorilla Coco, it's to be worth your while to investigate. Now, Coco has learned American Sign Language and has a very large vocabulary, and she described to her keepers what she felt when her mother was murdered. And of course, she was taken captive. But she had all kinds of interesting ways to, things that she communicated to her keepers, which are almost human, including when she looked through a magazine to find a mate and found a male gorilla that she wanted. And it was very interesting, and she picked all this out.
Thank you. I think we're about out of time. Maybe take one more.
I met a lady who was a fundamentalist Christian, and she was so pleased that she met me. She didn't know anything about me, but that I was a vegetarian, because she was. And she started spouting Bible verses that substantiated vegetarianism.
Support. You can find
Yes. And I said, oh, really? I didn't know. And, well, unfortunately, I ended the conversation by saying, well, you can find anything you want to support anything you want in the Bible. But I agree with you. Vegetarian's the way to go.
That's true. That's so true.
But I wondered if you knew of it.
On the internet, you can find all kinds of links to Christian you would just like Google Christian vegetarians, and that would take you where you want to go.